Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Ed with Professor Chris, the best college podcast where we explore the big questions about education, careers, and the future. But once again, most importantly, the show that is empowering minds one episode at a time. I am your host, Professor Chris, and the only one today. This edition of Let's Talk Ed with Professor Chris is going to be introducing a new segment called Ask Professor Chris. This is the time where I'm going to actually address most of your questions. And by all means, there are questions that you probably have that I haven't answered yet. I do encourage you, when you're watching the YouTube, write in the YouTube comments. Put your questions in there. I will answer any college questions. Example, students want to know why their tenured professors seem not to care. Well, first we got to talk about what a tenured professor is. Okay, so that's a whole new episode. But if you ask me that question, I will tell you exactly why, and probably not necessarily true either. But if you want to know all about tenured professors and why things change, you do ask, and I will tell you about it. Students want to know why they go on probation. Which one comes first? Is it probation, suspension? Is it suspension, probation? And why do you even get on it? If you ask me, I will answer that as well. I thought it was very interesting too when students say, Professor Chris, I thought I was going to get an incomplete because I was involved in maybe an accident. I let the instructor know by the end of the semester I still did not get an incomplete. Why? If you ask me, I will tell you. And maybe this section of Ask Professor Chris, I will be answering some of these questions, but please, once again, as you're watching this, if you have any questions, put it in the comments in the YouTube channel, and I will go through all the comments. I promise you, I will go through all the comments, or I'll get somebody to review the comments so I can answer those questions. Interesting enough, I've had discussion with students who talk about relationships with instructors. Can students be romantically involved with instructors? Very, very touchy subject. I will get into that, or if you ask me, I will tell you that as well. But that is a very interesting one that I've had, and I've got stories about that too that I'll share. So, once again, welcome to this edition of Let's Talk Ed, the segment we're calling Ask Professor Chris. The very first segment of Ask Professor Chris is entitled Under Threat, Navigating Gun Violence on Campus. And why did I pick this one? If you recall, 2 weeks ago, or the last but one episode of Let's Talk Ed, I had Chief Walker here, great interview. I learned a lot about guns on campus, the policies, things that I had no idea about when it comes to guns. Chief Walker was able to help us out. If you haven't seen that episode, please go back and watch it. However, the reason I want to do this here is because students asked about. Thank you, Professor Chris and Chief Walker, for a very great podcast. How does this really affect students academically? And I said, good point. I'm actually going to take it one step forward. I'm going to talk about how it affects students, period. And I'll give you my top 10 ways in which gun violence on campus, all the threat, kind of affects students on the whole. So once again, on the first segment of Ask Professor Chris, topic is Under Threat, and let's go. So please, if you haven't watched that episode, my interview with Chief Walker, please check it out. But let's get right into this segment, again entitled Under Threat. I'm going to take you back a little bit because I also kind of want to explain this with a real life situation, okay, with myself and my students. So let's start from Virginia Tech. Sorry, I have to bring Virginia Tech again because The incident I'm about to narrate actually ties directly into Virginia Tech. Well, maybe not so, but I'll explain why. Virginia Tech shooting happened April 16, 2007. 07. 33 deaths, including the perpetrator. Okay, the guy who went on a shooting spree ended up killing himself. 33 deaths. Okay. Fast forward 4 years later, I was actually in an institution, literally 4 years later. Mind you, after Virginia Tech, there were still protocols, there was still discussion on what needs to be done right to make our campus safe. So even though 4 years removed from Virginia Tech, you might think it's a long time, but it's not, okay? Because we still didn't know, or there was still discussion on what to do, how to keep students safe, what instructors should do. Should there be any emergency buttons that they could push in case of this incident? We're still discussing that, okay? So that was still new. Anyway, I happen to be teaching a civil engineering course called structural analysis. I still remember it like it was yesterday. In my class, to kind of give you some of the policies also in my class, and I think this was actually a governing rule for all the instructors. Cheating, as you know, is one of my biggest pet peeves, and I really don't want to get into that right now. But one of the rules for all exams when I was then teaching was you were not allowed to use a programmable calculator. And I'm sure you all know what a programmable calculator is. And the reason is very simple. If you have a programmable calculator, you can actually program formulas, equations, answers, solutions, you name it, right? You can actually program those into the calculator and use it on exams, and it could be cheating. So in order to avoid that, programmable calculators were not allowed on my exams. And once again, it wasn't just my class, but others as well. Anyway, on this beautiful day of second exams, as we got ready to start exams, I'm doing my usual walkthrough to make sure that students were using the right calculator, the prescribed calculator, the intended calculator to use during exams. And lo and behold, what do I see? I saw a student with his programmable calculator, and since the exams just started, I wasn't going to penalize him. I actually approached him very nicely and said, "Sir, Mr." By the way, I always use Mr. or Mrs. for my students. So, for the sake of discretion, and also to keep everything confidential, I'm not going to use any names. But since one of my good friends' name is James, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me using James, not a chief editor. Actually, I do have a few Jameses as I talk about it. But anyway, let's say Mr. James. I approached Mr. James very nicely, and I said, "Can I have your calculator?" Again, I was trying to be very discreet because students were in the middle of an exams. And then again, very politely, "Mr. James, can I please have the calculator?" Well, that didn't go too well. It didn't go as planned. Mr. James immediately got agitated, and words started flying out, words which I cannot repeat. Unfortunately for a student, that is an immediate, if not probation, a suspension. Once again, you want to know the difference between probation and suspension, we'll talk about that. Unfortunately for him, I couldn't even get any closer because then I realized that he was under the influence of alcohol. It looks like my dear friend, Mr. James, have been really preparing for the exams or not preparing for the exams. I don't know which one it was, but he was intoxicated, to say the least. Well, in the process, I did ask him again very nicely to step out, but at this point, he had already made a scene, and To the surprise of everybody else taking exams, he was going on and on and on, again using words that I could not use right now in this podcast. So I proceeded to go outside to find or call a security. But before I could do that, he already packed up his bag. He was ready to head out. And at this point, the students were all getting into him as to how disrespectful he was to me. I told them to calm down. And in the process, they were exchanging words. And this is what he said. Before I say this, I must add that this student was actually a veteran. And I respect my veterans so highly. And this is not against any veterans, because in my past 15 years of teaching, almost every year when I happen to have a veteran, this was an exception. Okay, so I'm not trying to create a blanket statement here about a veteran, but it just so happened to be one. And hence, he proceeded to let the students know very clearly that if they do not stop messing with him, he was going to come back and listed all the ammunition and guns that he has at home. Well, at this point, not only forget disrespecting the instructor and using bad language or bad words against the instructor, now we've actually crossed the threshold. Usually this is a case of immediate suspension. That's kind of what we're looking at. So as he packed his belongings, he headed out. And he said he was going to report me to the dean. For what? I don't know, but I was so glad that he suggested that. So I actually pointed him in the direction of where the dean is. Go downstairs, first floor, make a right. The dean's office is there, and I'll be more than happy to go talk to him. Fortunately, he was able to make his way out. And at this point, again, realizing what he has said, got all the students in their classroom panicking. Forget exams, because that wasn't happening. No student was in their right state of mind at that point to even concentrate on exams. So I collected all the exams from the students. I told them to calm down. We will have to reschedule these exams, but also very clearly telling them to be very careful. This is not a time. And I appreciate all the support that they gave me during that incident. But I also told them I could take care of myself. What I don't want happen is them get into any fight or anything with anyone else. Fast forward. I'm not going to get into what happened to our dear friend, but now I'm focused more on what to do with the students. So think about it. Now you are a student. Let's just pretend for a second. You were a student in my class that morning during the exams, and one of your friends insulted or was very angry, right? And threatened to go home, come back with Lord knows what. I'm going to pause for a second because I want you to put yourself in the classroom. As I mentioned, exams was done, okay, for that day. But what is going to happen the next day or the next time we have a class? How comfortable are you coming into class knowing or being in the middle of what just happened? Needless to say, our dear friend, of course, at this point here, was on probation. Completely out of the class. He was not allowed to come back to the class. But that is just one part of the solution. Remember, I always tell students this. One of the reasons why this is a very, very serious situation, and I'm talking about gun violence, by the way, in this case, is I guarantee you 95% of our college campuses, it's not within a barricade, right? There's nothing surrounding our campuses. There are easy ways in which students can get on campus. So when it comes to safety and security, right? We have to be on a high alert because most campuses are so open. I was in a private institution once. I'm talking private school with a front gate, yet there were entrance. Okay, there were different ways in which you could still get on that campus. It was a beautiful campus on the hill, and you had to drive up. But once again, the point I'm trying to make is when it comes to campus security, you cannot trust your surroundings. There are no barricades around your campus. So situations like this is very, very, very serious. That needs to be taken very seriously. Back to the situation here. So yes, even though our dear friend was on a security alert and the whole campus security had alerted us that the student was not allowed on the campus anymore, I must admit some of my students were still not 100% safe, and I didn't blame them. We literally, for the rest of the semester, had undercover security at our classroom, which most of the students probably did not know. It was a summer semester, so we only probably had about 6 weeks left, but for 6 weeks, that's exactly what happened. So once again, I'm about to talk about the different ways in which situations like this, or gun violence, or again, what happens to a student who feels threatened or under threat, which is what the topic is today. I'm going to give you, once again, my top 10 effects on how students can be affected if they find themselves in this situation. It is not fun always constantly looking over your shoulders to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. Number one, put yourself in this situation, this very exact situation. You were in my class during exams. This happened. Student is kicked out. We got 6 more weeks to go. What is going to happen to you? Number one on my list is increased anxiety and stress. That was exactly what happened to my students. 6 weeks happened to be one of the longest weeks of semester I'd ever gone through with my students. Not to mention some who just plainly told me they were just going to wait till the following semester to take the class. The mental health issues that this could have. Usually we talk about PTSDs. We think maybe it's PTSDs is when you go into war or when you go to fight. No. A situation like this could put a student into a PTSD because you're constantly thinking about what if. So that's the first point. Again, the first effect or how a situation like this can affect a student is increased anxiety and stress. Number two, as I already alluded to, reduced class attendance. It took me easily about 2 weeks with sending emails, and this was before COVID and this was before virtuality, right? There was nothing virtual then. And yet students were still asking me if it was okay to come to class or, Professor Chris, is it safe to come to class? We did a lot of work via email. It took about 2 weeks for some students to comfortably come to class after I told them, hey, this is what is happening. Don't worry, we got some security. The student is not allowed on campus, just to kind of give them confidence a little bit. Again, number two, reduced class attendance happens because you can't avoid it, right? There's disruption. Okay. Number three, let's get through this real quick. Decline in academic performance. It is hard enough. I've always said this. It is hard enough. I'm using engineering as an example. It is hard enough to learn the concepts in class. Now add watching over your shoulders because you're in an environment that you don't feel safe in. Okay? So yes, your academic performance is going to decline. Number three, decline in academic performance is going to happen. You're not motivated. Your motivation is reduced because first of all, you don't want to even come to class. Number four, social isolation. Unfortunately, with this situation, what students happen to do is like, well, I don't even trust the classroom, okay, first of all. Now, why would I put myself in an environment in this huge campus when I don't know what the student is going to come back to do. So there's immediately a disconnect. For students who tend to study within groups, that is not going to happen anymore. So yes, automatically becomes a social isolation. Number 4. Number 5, cognitive impairment. You are not sitting in the class trying to grasp anything or focus with this on your mind. It's not going to happen. So memory and learning, no, it's out of the way. It takes a lot. I already touched on it. College concepts are challenging enough, plus other distractions that we usually have anyway. Now you're going to add threat to it. It's not going to happen. That's my number 5, cognitive impairment. Number 6, overall, right? And this is not, again, now we're getting out of the situation, but number 6 is increased dropout rates. Students will leave school. And yes, I've heard it, students, it's just an excuse for students. No, I know good students who might just drop out of school because they feel threatened or don't feel comfortable. So they will leave school, right? If it's an institution where there's persistent threats or they feel like the environment is not safe, they're not going to be coming to school, period, let alone a classroom. Number 7, campus culture. Now you have a disruptive learning environment. Not only is it, this incident happened in my classroom, fortunately, there was no big announcements made about that, but I'm sure friends were talking to their friends, and before you know it, everybody's asking the same question. What's going to happen? If this person happens to come to the campus, is this person going to just target just the students in the classroom who were going back and forth with him? No, usually it's not. No matter how you plan it, usually we know that's not the case, right? So yes, the campus culture could be affected with the situation. And then of course, number 8 is physical and emotional exhaustion. It's tiring. It is very tiring to wake up every morning as a student to go to classroom just thinking about your schoolwork, what you have to do, and thinking about campus security, right? It is very, very tiring. Number 9. Number 9 on my list is decreased trust in authority. And we've all heard this over and over and over again, and the incidents keeps happening over and over and over again. When I talk about decreased trust in authority, I'm not just talking about the leaders within our campus environment, but the bigger picture. Every time there's a gun violence, there's discussion about gun controls and this and that and that, and it never goes anywhere. So this is a much bigger discussion, okay? But this is exactly how students will feel when they find themselves in the situation. They don't trust anybody because with the heads, we don't trust the heads, let alone the authority on the campus. So there's got to be a way for students to trust the environment. They have to trust the authority. In this case, when it happened, the dean immediately came up to me and we had a very good discussion on what to do, what should be some of the immediate measures to protect our students. And we came up with security every time during my class. And that's exactly how we handled that. But this is a very quick, simple solution to 6 weeks of what was left of that semester. And number 10, long-term effects. I have had friends, close friends, who have found themselves in situations with guns who are still seeing a therapist. Because every noise triggers, right? Again, fortunately, my situation didn't get to that point. But it's going to be a long-term effect. It's going to happen right after the class. It's not just going to be within the class. It can happen after the class. Okay. So, in summary, again, maybe this took a little longer, but I'm answering the question as to the effects of threats to students. And as I went through my list, my top 10, as you can see, it's not just the academical part that the students are affected in. Number 1 on that list was mental stress and anxiety. That's the biggest one. I don't care how smart you are. If you're dealing with that, nothing is going to work well. So in summary, the threats can severely disrupt academic and personal lives of college students. Facts. Okay? But we're not going to leave it there. If you go back to the interview with Chief Walker, once again, I provide a lot of different ways in which institutions can help you, as well as how you can help the institutions provide a safe environment for your college. Okay. Our institutions are doing a great job building a safe environment, right? Everybody's talking about campus security. There's quite a lot. There's a lot of security everywhere that you look at. So it's pretty good, okay? What are we doing on our part? Once again, as I mentioned, you see something, you say something. You call 911. Okay. It goes. It calls for help. Okay. All right. Before I close, I know every time I talk about threat or under threat or students, the first solution, or especially when it comes to students, is, you know what, I'm going to take all my classes virtually. Unfortunately, while that might be the safest, I also don't see that as a solution, because our current education, especially, no matter what you study, human interaction plays a big role in our education system. And no matter how virtual we go, that is always going to be missing, and we want that to be part of our education experience. So while I agree with you that the safest way to avoid all this here is virtuality, I think there has to be a better way to handle that situation. And that way is making sure that our campus is safe, so we can still interact with humans. Well, I hope this helped. Once again, I will continue this segment of Let's Talk Ed with Professor Chris. Ask Professor Chris. Okay. Please, if you had any more questions on this very topic, when you watch this on YouTube, put it in the comments. That's how we're going to do it now. Put it in the comments. I'll go through the comments. I'll pull the questions out, and then I will make it just like this here. I will probably be answering multiple questions if that helps. So I will go through all the different questions that you put on or in the comments there. Okay. Questions, comments, suggestions, what have you. Please put it in there. So please, if you haven't subscribed yet, please encourage your friends to subscribe. Stay tuned as we continue exploring the evolving landscape of education and careers. Until then, please stay curious. Once again, ask Professor Chris, and remember, this is the show that empowers minds one episode at a time. Don't drink beer, but live beer. Balance, eat well, exercise, and rest. From me to you, stay tuned, and please share Let's Talk Ed, and let all your friends know that Professor Chris is now answering your questions. See you all next time.